Hello, everyone. I am excited to introduce you to the first episode of Conquering the Tumult, an Altered TCG competitive podcast. My name is Malcolm Hall. I also go by Mammolian in the Discord or just Malmo for short. Um, Again, this is just an intro to the podcast. For episode one, we'll be talking about the competitive mindset. I am looking to touch on newer players who are turning the corner into or thinking about getting into competitive, and also the veteran TCG players who have that experience of playing competitively. There'll also be things in this podcast as well too. And the goal is to maybe have each episode maybe 30 or 45 minutes. Just do a bit of like covering just a bit of news and then usually just hopping into the meat of the show. I typically like for my podcast, sometimes I listen on like 1.5 or 2 times speed just so I can get to the meat of the show in order for what I am looking to get better in. So I said that if I ever did my own show, this is what I would try to do. And that's what's happening now. So, a bit of housekeeping before we get started on our topic today. Um, I do want to talk about the tournament that was in, oh God, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Angers, France at Ludo Trotter. That's the first big tournament that is taking place for Altered since the official launch. And then the next one that I know that's happening this weekend is in Arizona Gamers Guild over here stateside. So I'm hoping that by the next episode, which right now I'm currently planning on doing these bi-weekly, that I'll be able to have those top cut debts and have some analysis so that we can go on into the next episode. So the first thing that I want to talk about in of having a competitive mindset is let's get some misconceptions out the way. You do not have to win everything. Competitive is one of those trigger words that you think, oh, I completely have to dominate. I have to win all the time, every time, and it's a toxic mindset, and it is a mindset that could lead to burnout and just not having a good time with the game. So I want to reiterate that, for example, for making like a top 16 for most TCGs, usually that's like a 7 or 8 round Swiss round event. Normally, if you go 6-2, normally 6-2, which is, I believe, 75% win rate. 6 out of 8, 75, give or take my math. And I think it's under 80%. That would be good enough to get you into the top cut for the chance to compete for winning the whole event. And if the game has ties, I'm not sure how everything's working out yet as far as for ties, but even like, 5, 1, and 2, you're only winning like 65% of your game, but you have 2 ties that help you. That could also help get you into a top cut as well, too. So I just want to get that out of the way. Don't feel like you have to win like some absurd rate of like 95% or 100% of your games in order to be doing well. Let's just go ahead and nip that in the bud right now. The second thing I want to talk about is net decking is okay. Um, this is I'm not gonna say polarizing, but it is definitely a divide in a lot of games, not just TCGs, but any like tabletop games or anything that has a competitive format in general. They say that people are just, they're what you call meta monkeys. They're just copying and pasting decks and playing. There's no skill involved, and that's not true because you can take a top performing deck and not win a single game with it. There's still some element of skill involved. Just because you're picking the deck that is playing the best cards or the best combinations does not mean that um, you're going to win. And just because you're playing it, um, again, you're not that player. So there's different people who have different philosophies, different play styles. So don't be afraid to find out that a deck is doing well and a hero that you're interested in or using cards that you really like. Play the deck. That is the way that you find out like why the deck performs well. Also, in this day and age now, between YouTube and Twitter and Discord, all the social media and stuff, the person who's actually playing the deck might be available just to talk to them about it and just kind of ask a thought process. So I do want to say that some people frown upon net decking because they think you just have to come up with an original deck. Anything that you use just has to be something that you've done, and that does not necessarily have to be the case. Now, the next thing I'll talk about, whales don't always win. So if you aren't familiar in the TCG world, whales are the ones who have quite a bit of money. They're typically buying the best cards that are available on the market. They have, all the rares, so the ultra rares in this particular game, uniques, but they don't always win. Again, just because you have good cards, they'll help your cause. They'll help your win probability go up because you're playing them in the deck. But again, if you don't pilot the deck correctly, it doesn't matter that you have the most expensive cards known to man, that you have the best uniques for your deck in the deck if you can't play the deck well. So I want to get that out of the way. Just because you're maybe playing against other players, just because you spent the money on the cards, doesn't mean that that's also going to be automatic wins for you as well too. And speaking of automatic wins, I do want to talk about that not all top players are snobs. I play before Altered had came out. I was playing Universes by UVS Games is my primary TCG, and the previous world champion and the current world champion. You would not be able to tell. They are in the room. They are friendly with veterans just as well as newbies, but they don't go around flaunting it. They don't go around, have a shirt that says "I'm the best" or have a deck box and thing like that. You wouldn't have been able to pick them out the room until somebody I know I like when I usually highlighted them at an event. I would just pass this like, hey, you talked to the world champ, right? And they'll be like, really? They didn't say anything. They didn't mention anything about it. So just know, those ones that you do run into, there's going to be some in the community. Unfortunately, that's just every community. That's not, don't let that be the end all be all, like the major representation. Not all top players are that way. And then the last thing that I want to put everybody's mind at ease with is nobody knows everything. There is entirely too many cards. There's 18 different heroes. Sure, factions run similar things. There's going to be some staples for the faction that carry over across all three heroes. But nobody knows nothing. Nobody knows the full exact cards, combinations, play styles, the whole nine, and uniques even added on into that as well too. So there's never really any way that you're going to have 100% knowledge. So just know that that's okay. That's another common thing that I see that newer players for TCGs have. They feel like, oh, I don't have enough knowledge. I don't know everything, so therefore I'm not going to be the best. Or again, somebody that think they know quite a bit of stuff, but they don't know how to sequence playing. So just take solace in knowing that nobody knows completely everything. Um, they just know a healthy amount of knowledge, and then that's what they use in order to be a top performer. So next thing I want to talk about is developing this mindset. First, we got some common misconceptions out the way. Let's go ahead and get those out the way so now we can clear and prepare ourselves to figure out how to develop a healthy competitive mindset. First thing is repetition, repetition, repetition. One of the most important things you're going to have as you are heading into competitive mindset is you have got to get the reps in. You've got to get games in. You've got to put time in, not just in games, but rereading cards, learning cards, and all of this is good. That's just going to be this is mainly the time investment that you're putting into being a competitive player. I cannot say that I want to play well and then I don't practice. Like, that's absurd, right? I'm not going to say that I hardly cook and then all of a sudden I'm going to say I'm going to go to a 5-star restaurant and apply to be a head chef. I have not done any other work prior than before that. And then just to expect that I'm going to be able to produce, a 5-star world class, a top notch meal. And I hadn't put any work in at any other lower level. The next thing we're going to talk about improving game knowledge, both fundamental game knowledge, which is like your broad and general, and then specific. And we'll get into more details when we get to that point later on here in the podcast. And then the last thing that I think I want to talk about today is we're going to set specific goals for practice, for your tournament, for yourself. I'm not going to have meaningful uh, improvement until you have specific goals in mind. And again, we'll go into detail with that when it comes. Okay. Repetition, repetition. Playing games. Um, that's just the easiest way to do this. If you're practicing in a sport, you got to go to practice. You can't just show up on game day and expect to be able to do everything great, expect to know what your opponent's doing, expect to know. Like you just got to put in the work. That's how you get comfortable with characters. That's how you understand. Here's how you develop your play style. That's how you're developing your deck strategies. And that's why I have the Caesar Shroom here. Caesar Shroom likes to get played, be anchored, do things, get powerful, go back to reserve, come back to anchor, then just rinse and repeat. For all my Muna players, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I want to add that don't just play constructed. Playing other formats is what is also going to kind of help you get in the groove of learning those certain plays. For example, like wanting to play cheaper units first, playing from the reserve first, so you can kind of keep your bigger stuff safe or play from hand and things like that. That all is across all formats. So not just constructed, but sealed. So just getting games in, getting as many games in as you can definitely helps. Board Game Arena is perfect for this. You can hop online. Game maybe takes 15 or 20 minutes. So you figure, hey, average game 15, 20 minutes. In an hour, you could have gotten 3 games in. A couple hours, that's like 6 games. So just kind of set something aside for the day. Like, if you can't play, I don't have a locals yet. I'm working on trying to get an LGS. I have a demo night set up for them. They agreed to let me run some demos of Altered here because, of course, I would love to play in person. But having that digital client is huge, absolutely huge for me to be able to get games in so I'm not falling behind. So when I do want to travel to these bigger tournaments, I at least am able to be putting in that work. And then hopefully eventually get my own LGS running so I can have my own locals to be able to bounce off and play games as well too. The next thing I want to talk about is giving a deck. I say 10 games before deciding to keep it or move on. 10 games is always my general rule of thumb for any of the TCGs that I play. Of course, as you become a better player, as you become a more experienced player, you will know when things are working in a deck. Or if a deck is working for you as a particular character, anything like that, a lot sooner than 10 games. But I want to recommend for those who are just coming into the competitive arena or for those who are just getting into Altered's competitive side, play 10 games of the deck before changing cards or just moving to something else entirely. Just give it a full 10 games. Don't make any changes with it. Give it yourself a chance to familiarize yourself with the cards in the deck, with your play patterns and things like that before you try to figure out what to do there. And then play the weakness to your deck. I cannot tell you sometimes the best way to improve your deck is to play your worst matchup. So if you have buddies or friends and you struggle, for example, I've been playing a ton of Akesha right now. I really like her matchup into a lot of heroes. The worst matchup I struggle with so far is Tasia and Muna going wide. Normally going wide, I deal with that with Ortis, and I have, Kraken. I have ways to deal with that. The biggest issue that I've been having with Tasia and them is that being able to go wide with Anchor, because when I'm playing cards like Spycraft or things to send them to the reserve, they're still cheap enough that they can come right back out. And then now the onus is on me to be able to try to have units to be able to put back out after that in order to try to win the zones. So that's been my most difficult matchup. I did not start improving that matchup until I put a Tasia deck together. Just a run of the mill, what we would call like a stock list Tasia. I just ran good stuff in there. And just kind of got an idea for how to impact the deck or what I didn't like being done to me as I was playing that deck. And that's allowed me to tweak and tailor my Acacia deck to try to make that matchup a little bit better. So, of course, this game is new, so you might not be able to understand that right away. But if you have people who are here to help with you or like I said, locals to have help with you. There's more content creators popping up for this game. You might run into a match that you just might happen to type it into your YouTube search bar, and there's a video made about the deck that you're running, and then they talk about the weaknesses of the deck or tough matchups against the deck, and you could just have your answer there. Up next is game knowledge. Game knowledge is paramount. Game knowledge is when you start, mastery of game knowledge is when there's that separation between okay players and great players. Game knowledge is mastery of game knowledge is what's also causes you to speed up your gameplay and lower your mental load because having that trove of knowledge, understanding situations and things like that would allow you to process the information in the board state a lot quicker. That will lead to less ties or misplays simply because you're used to seeing some things going along, so you can kind of compartmentalize that. There's been studies that's done on that. I think it's called like a Peter loop or something along the lines of that. But it does apply here as well too. But that also goes hand in hand with getting reps. The more games that you play, the more game knowledge that you are obtaining. And there's two types of game knowledge. You've got broad game knowledge and specific game knowledge. So broad game knowledge would be your what I like to call your fundamentals. What I was talking about earlier, such as playing your lower costed units first, playing from reserve first if you can, and then from your hand, not emptying your hand out early on an entire phase so that you're top decking early. Like these are the type of broad knowledge, playing your good units later or after your opponent has the spent their mana to play their things. So um, that's like the broad game knowledge. Like um, that's going to be the core fundamental because of how locals work, areas work. There are going to be matchups that you never see. So, for example, like I could never see Trace being played. So I've never practiced against Trace. But you better believe if I go to whatever Alter's equivalent for like a regional or, a 500-person tournament or something like that, chances are I might pop up against a Trace. Well, I never played against him. So how do I never played against them. So how do I go into the matchup when I'm literally going in blind? This is when you fall back onto your broad game knowledge base. So you can see Trace and say, okay, he does things that likes to get stuff into reserve, resupply, things like that. So now you can get back into your engine. Okay, I know Subhash does, kind of a similar thing for taking something out of hand and resupplying. What strategies do I have against resupply? Okay, I have my discard, for again using Izmir because that's just been the faction I've been playing. Okay, my spot crafts are still going to put in work here. These are the type of things I said that having that broad game knowledge. So even though I may have never played against these heroes or seen this particular deck archetype, I can begin to quickly identify what type. Okay, they go wide. Are there, I'm sorry, going wide is just putting a bunch of smaller units out, but typically overwhelming by numbers. Or going tall is where I to make have a smaller amount of characters, but making their stats really big. And this is what you would depend on. Specific game knowledge. Specific game knowledge is where you're getting into matchups. This is where we call identifying who's the beat down. Yes, broad knowledge will eventually help you identify that as well too, but in specific matches ups as well, specific game knowledge will tell you that as well. So for example, using the Kesha again because that is my main deck, I know if I am sitting across the table from a Waru, I know that I am the beat down despite me being a control deck. In that matchup I need to be aggro because I know if it goes to the late game, Waru is a much better uh, hard control deck than I am. Um, and then from there, I need to identify specific knowledge is where I'm knowing the power spikes. So I know, okay, at 4 costs, unless there's some type of unique out there that makes it less, I know around 4 costs, the potential for Robin Hood is there to come out. So I have to game plan around that. Like, okay, maybe I need to play my if I'm going first before that, maybe I need to put my expensive character out first before Robin Hood comes out and make that character too expensive to play at all. Or perhaps I need to hold on to some smaller characters to account for that cost being +1, but I can still get units out because I have now held cards or held units in my hand to account for that. That's when that specific game knowledge comes in. And that changes from meta to meta. So I would say prioritize improving your broad game knowledge first, and then in specific knowledge will kind of simultaneously you'll learn as well as you're going through certain matchups. And then again as well, it changes from meta. So if your local meta is Sigismar, that doesn't run any type of permanents, they're just to go wide and run units that are creating orders recruits. You need to be able to respond to that. Or if you're playing against in another area Sigismar and they are using the monolith and the carrier and things like that, then you'll need to have crafted your deck to deal with that accordingly from there. Another great way to gain game knowledge is to judge events. One of the best things that I had did in other TCGs that I have played is judge an event or like judge a locals or regionals, things like that. You will find out like combinations or keyword or wordings or rulings within the rule book that will unlock secrets for information for triggering very powerful combos, very powerful effects. And sometimes just as a judge, when you're talking and explaining something out to a player, like for a judge ruling, or they ask why they can't do this or that, being able to articulate that to another player, show that you've had a mastery of the knowledge, being able to say, okay, I now not only understand this, but I understand it well enough that I can break it down and explain it to another player. It is definitely valuable. So if you do get the opportunity to judge an event, or like what I'll be doing, I'll be on standby once I am running off the demos for my LGS, just to kind of stand by so that those questions could come by. It's another great way to kind of get some experience for gaining your knowledge. Goal setting. Goal setting is kind of the last big thing that I want to touch on here. Goals need to be a bit more fleshed out than just get better. If your goal is just to get better, okay, how are we getting better? If we don't have a step by step, and I'm not saying it's got to be like a super step by step bulleted point, but we need something a lot better than just, okay, well, I want to get good. Okay, well, how are you going to get good? Are you just going to play more games? What are you trying to get better at? So you just need to be a bit more specific with your goal. So I'll say, for example, right now, I want to raise my ELO in Board Game Arena. So I want to raise it by about 150 ELO, and I like to have that by the end of the week. I want to be able to continue to refine my Akesha deck. I would like to get this deck, let's say, to a win rate above 60% for the week. These are specific goals that I have in mind, goals that I can track my progress. So if later on in the week I'm realizing, oh man, I'm like at a 45% win rate with this deck, I need to either figure out what adjustments I need to make, or maybe perhaps I need to just go play a different deck. Maybe that type of style of character or that type of faction is just not working for me. I need to go and try something else. So have multiple goals set that are both short term and long term. Again, like I described, the short term goal, I want my ELO ranking to go up by 150 by the end of the week. I want it to be 60% by the end of the week. And then your long term goal could maybe be, okay, hey, I want to be able to um, make it to the top table of a 500 person regional, or I want to be able to make the next top cut. I want to be able to play any event that's big enough to have a top cut and make the top cut. Once you set these specific goals that you can track your progress for, it will make focusing on becoming better a lot easier. So I said, this is a card game. Again, like there could be 1,000 people. I think it's unrealistic for you to say, okay, I want to win every event that I play in. I mean, you can set that goal, but the issue is there can only be one winner. And there's a ton of people, and then you've got things like card variants, matchups that you won't know that you're in, the whole nine. Like you can have a terrible matchup and then you could play 8 rounds of Swiss, 4 rounds in Top Cut, and never see your worst matchup, and it'd be fine. Then there's going to be other tournaments where you're going to run into your worst matchup in 4 out of the 6 rounds of Swiss, and you hope that you maybe went 50-50 with that, but it even might not be been there. But the goal is just to be consistent. This is how we consistently get better. We're not trying to. I would put it to like being YouTube. We're not trying to be a viral star overnight. I'd rather have consistent growth to where I can depend upon, what is being put out as opposed to being a one hit wonder. And setting and sticking goals is that key to having that consistency heading into improvement. Okay, we are now closing the portal. That was the first episode. I want to say, yeah, I did. This is pretty neat too. I just wanted to show that. So it looks like this is the first player token, but it looked like to me like an open portal to jump in, and then at the end here, this looks like all right, the portal's closed. We're done. I just thought it was a neat idea. I just wanted to bring that up. But that is the first episode of just setting up the competitive mindset. Again, I just want to start getting into that mindset for my veteran players. I know this may seem like, okay, we know this already. Just hang tight with me, because I said Altered is a bit of a different TCG. For some people, this is their first TCG, and for some folks, this will be their first competitive TCG. So I'm trying to encompass all walks of competitive, both the newbies and the vets that I'm trying to bring in together. So the next episode, just as a preview, we're going to talk about deck building, because deck building is the next thing that I feel that it's important now that we are tracking what our mindset is. The next thing we're going to build upon is deck building, because of course that is going to be the next important thing is building that deck and then playing that deck out. And I am hoping, as of right now, tentatively, I will have Justin Parnell, who is the organized play manager of North America, on for the show to kind of help me out with that. And we'll be discussing back and forth about deck building on the competitive side of things. So, guys, thank you so much. I have not done a podcast before, so this is my first rough go. If you have any tips for me, I am more than receptive to constructive criticism. Again, I just want to keep this like 30, 45 minutes. I just want this to be able to listen to your lunch break, maybe before you head out to your locals, just something you want to kind of keep in mind or have in your background while you're working on something, just to kind of like get in there, get the meat of stuff, and then get back out. And then I rather you spend 30, 40 minutes listening to the content and then spending the rest of your time like applying what's going on. Again, thanks for the listen, and I wish you all well, and I will catch you in the next episode.